Welcome everybody, as I said. Just to introduce myself, if I haven't seen you before at other events or sessions that we've been running as part of the SEND Centre for Excellence here at Weston College, which is commissioned by the Education and Training Foundation. I'm Sam Mayhew and I'm the strategic lead for the Weston College SEND Centre for Excellence. And I'm also a Dean of Faculty at Weston College. So I manage the provision for students with learning difficulties, barriers to learning, those that are considered SEND, and also look at the support programs that are in place for those learners. So hopefully today, through a team of people that we've brought to the webinar, we'll be sharing our practice and around how we're working with students with learning difficulties and in particular those with some complex learning difficulties. We have Charlotte Judd, who's a specialist autism practitioner here at Weston College. She has a dual role and she's also a digital learning coach, which really focuses on supporting all staff across the organisation with their digital skills. And her role has been crucial, especially in the last year. And when we planned this session back in September, we obviously had no idea that we'd be delivering a session a week into this third lockdown. So we've slightly adapted the presentation this afternoon, and we hope that we're going to give you that overview of some of the strategies and teaching and learning processes that we're using with learners through that remote delivery. We also have Ben McConkie with us, and Ben is an inclusive practice manager here at the college, and his role really focuses on training staff to work within the SEND faculty and within the areas outside of the college, whether it be social care providers and schools, around really specialising and having that professional knowledge and high level of training in working with people with SEND. We're really excited that we have Will Britton here this afternoon, who's the CEO from a company called Autonomy. And we're going to share with you an investment tool that we've bought into more recently this year to really help to provide digital technology for learners with complex learning difficulties. So I'll make a start. I've just realised that I've forgotten to do my Boris bit and say, next slide, please, Caroline. So we'll just skip past that first slide because I don't want to waste time going through that slide. So if we move on to the third slide, that would be really helpful, Caroline. But I suppose it's just really about thinking about the context that we're currently in. And I imagine for those of you that are in further education at the moment, it's a really, just pause it for 2 secs. It's a really challenging time to think that all learning, apart from those vulnerable learners, and the list has changed, as you will all know, around who can access on-site provision. But what we're hearing from the sector, from other colleges that we're working closely with, is that there are those learners that we're bringing in for the on-site provision. But in the main, we're really focusing on the remote delivery and following the government guidance of keeping as many learners engaged through the remote platform. So just before I start to talk about our platform, I just thought I'd show you a little bit of a roundup of what happened at Weston College when we went virtual previously. So sorry, Caroline, if you could start that slide, and hopefully everybody can hear. Thanks, Caroline. I think that, as you can see, this last week has been, you know, for many of you and for us at our college, really challenging. But what we're really lucky at our college, and many of you hopefully will have the same experience, is the digital strategy that the college implemented was something that we started a journey towards that 2 or 3 years ago. So we've already been using Microsoft Teams with all our students, and we've been delivering that blended approach since September for our new learners. So we've been working alongside the learners through their individualized programs so that this is embedded in everything that they do. So when we did go into that lockdown period last week, learners were already prepared for what was going to happen, and were already confident and had those digital skills to be able to use the platform. I think that just showing this slide here is really about how we're all navigating and trying to process what's happening in our country at the moment. And you can see on the left-hand side are the comments that the students are making at the moment about that processing, like I said, the current context. And what we're dealing with as educationists is around those learners, especially those learners with SEND, and have SEMH and have had really bad previous experience of schools, but also have been out of education since March last year. So I imagine from all of you that are here today, this is very similar to what you're hearing for your learners that are based within your colleges. So it's really looking how we respond to ensure that we continue to allow these learners to be able to access education. So the key themes, by moving on to the next slide, Caroline, that have come out of this are about learners really understanding what's happening and having those conversations with their tutors around how their individualized program is being changed quite significantly, and how they're still able to work towards their outcomes and still have a pathway of education that's meaningful to them, whilst they're really worried about the future of employment and transitioning onto high level courses. And it's that levels of motivation, as we're hearing constantly, is about how are we going to keep learners motivated as teams, how are we going to keep ourselves as staff members working through the virtual platform every day, sitting in front of a screen, and what strategies can we implement so that we really focus on our mental health and well-being. It's that level of isolation, it's not being parts of a teams, and those of you that work in SEND teams, from my experience, and Ben and Charlotte and Will and Caroline will echo, is the fact that team spirit, and it's those team interactions that we have on a daily basis and how we support each other with the different learners that we're working through. We're really worried about the attendance of learners, although significantly the attendance last week did increase for learners that were most far away from education, and that was a real surprise to us. But I think from being out of college we had a week of no college the week before Christmas, and then it was the 2-week period. I think that just demonstrated to us how much the education means to them and their peers and their tutors in supporting them, and that needing that real clear structure and routines in their lives. So in that situation, the learners' attendance increased, but how are we going to keep that going over the next couple of months? Our other concern is obviously about accessibility for young people, and that don't have access to, they may be using their phones, but they may not have Wi-Fi, or they may be sharing Wi-Fi in a household of many people that are all working online and studying online at the same time. So it's looking at what we can do to support learners. We don't want learners to have to come into college because their access to digital technology is a barrier. So we've looked carefully at how we can utilize resources within the college to enable learners to have laptops and dongles and Wi-Fi and iPads and keyboards that they can use in the home. We have seen, many of you may have felt the same, is that the high levels of additional support that that students are needing at the moment, where they were maybe having a tutorial with their tutor for 15 minutes every fortnight. They're needing tutorials for some on a daily basis, and more time with their tutors to really understand and process what's happening. And we're creating lots of videos and blogs and vlogs for young people so that they are gaining extra support outside of the tutorial process, obviously around the lunch vouchers and the welfare support. That's been where those real increases have come through. So moving on to the next slide, Caroline. I mentioned about Microsoft Teams and how this is the platform that our college is using. And like I said, it's been a strategy for a number of years now. And this allows so much flexibility, but it's making sure that our staff are skilled in using it and having that real understanding of what the staff needs are. So we assessed every member of staff at the start of September again, and more recently to look around what training was needed within the organisation. And that was where it was key that the college continued to invest and expand the digital learning coaches, like Charlotte's here today to talk to you about her role. So we've put some of these extra slides in as we go through the afternoon. We're not going to go through every slide, but just showing you more examples that you may want to take back to your organisation if you're not already using them. I think one of the biggest barriers in working with students remotely for us has been around individualising their programmes, because we're much more able to do that when we're accessing on-site delivery. So I think that we're still looking at the learners' outcomes and how we're working towards those outcomes, but it's about engagement at the moment. It's about practicing their communication online and being with their peers, and looking at some of the things that they can do within the home. And part of that is the partnership that we have with the parents and those circles of support, so that they continue to enable learners to be able to practice the skills in the home and have the support to do so. If you move on to the next slide, please, Caroline. I think that one of the things that it was just looking back to the previous lockdown and looking at our lessons learned, and from talking to the staff that are delivering across the faculty, these are the things that they felt were so crucial in our lessons learned. And it's around dropping the pressure so that learners learn the mechanics of working through the virtual platform and the remote learning. Focusing on one activity at a time. I know that sounds slightly patronising around, well, why, of course you wouldn't do 2 activities at a time, but it's about the learners understanding one concept and then moving on to another concept, but also using the different rooms available within teams, so you can have different learners working on different things at different times, matched to their learning needs. Check in on learners in a timely manner, but also not forgetting those extension activities. And learners have really enjoyed being set those activities outside of the virtual sessions that they're really proud of. They can upload onto the OneNote platform, they can share with their tutors, they can share with their peers. We probably have used more different types of extension activities than we probably did when we were in the classroom, if we look back, and that's been a real positive of the remote learning. Feedback is crucial, and we found that feedback's not only crucial for the learners, obviously, but it's also for the parents and carers, so that they can continue to be developing those skills at home. And like I said, around that motivation and increasing attendance or keeping attendance, it's about giving them those reasons to be online. And also checking in with how the learners are and ensuring that holistic approach of specialist support and welfare support is wrapped around that individual, so that they can access that right the way through the week. So I'm hoping that gave you a little bit of a whistle-stop tour on where we are and where we've come from and some of the things that we're doing. I'm now going to move over to Charlotte, who's as I said, our digital coach and also a specialist practitioner in autism, and she's going to tell you a little bit about her role and how she's been working with some learners. So over to you, Charlotte.
Great, thanks, Sam. So firstly, I thought when I was asked to work on this webinar, what were the really effective strategies that we found working specifically with learners with autism? And I got students on board to give some feedback and to also know what kind of different variety of activities worked. And the biggest thing for us was really planning on trying not to have too much focused attention, so not just having a Teams call where there's lots of verbal instruction, and really trying to break that up. The biggest thing for us was that students asked for longer pauses, and I think in any call, I'm sure we've all been on Zoom calls or Teams calls where you want to fill the awkward silence, but not only for the delay in someone saying something and the other person hearing it on the other side, but also the time for students to process that information and how they go about then responding is really important. Teams has a really good breakout rooms element now, where you can form separate small groups in quite a quick time. So we quite often get students to go into little breakout groups with peers that they feel comfortable discussing, and then the support can access them. And that's been really important as well, having a good utilisation of different support staff that are confident working with those learners in those environments. The chat function, like the Zoom call, is a really good way of students communicating. Initially, we had lots of students that would join a call with camera and microphone off and would really find it anxiety provoking to respond. And we've changed that in a number of ways. Zoom and Teams are really good for changing backgrounds. So we used to play games at the start to kind of settle students in by who could find the most creative background. And the students quickly discovered that they could upload their interested images, such as Simpsons or Disney, just to get them interacting and feeling comfortable. And that's really reducing the social isolation. I know a lot of us are feeling quite limited at home and might not have a lot of people to talk to. So that's been really beneficial for our students. And really focusing on that dual curriculum, we focus a lot on the autism support, learning about their autism, but also having that time for one-to-one tutorials, but that all the content is embedded through the curriculum. So it's really important that we carried that on. And for so many of our learners, that was the first thing they wanted coming into lockdown, was that consistent approach. Next slide, please. So here's a case study of one of the students that I've been working with for 2 years. James is a learner on the autism spectrum. His first year at college, he found it really difficult to attend due to high anxiety. And even when he was in sessions, his engagement was quite withdrawn. Quite often, James would just sit on the bus and go round the journey over and over because he was worried about what coming into college would look like and worried about asking for support. In the summer of that year, I picked up on Microsoft and Teams and all the accessibility features that it had. And we started trialing it with James, using it as a chat space, using it as a virtual call space. And really quickly, he responded to it very well. He's somebody that's very interested in IT. So we almost used it as him trying to teach me how to use the software. And straight away in September, he had 100% engagement because everything was suddenly more predictable. For some lessons, when he was on the bus, he could message me instantly saying how he felt. And then we could do a number of different strategies. So one of them, I used to just start a call with him and he could listen to the audio of me starting the lesson, so that if he felt able to, he would come into the class and sit in his usual seat, and he would already know what we'd been discussing, rather than walking into a busy classroom and not knowing what was going on. I'm really proud to say that James has now transitioned into an apprenticeship to pursue an employment outcome, hopefully in the IT sector. And a massive achievement for him was just before Christmas, he helped me deliver a webinar to over 200 people about the challenges that he faced. And I think that really shows the impact of using virtual delivery and accessibility. Next slide, please. And when I was talking to James, as we had his kind of exit tutorial and he transitioned over to an apprenticeship, he kind of gave this feedback, and he found that sessions were so much more predictable on Teams because all the content stayed there after the session. So he could see what he covered, he could recap anything he missed, and kind of continue those discussions with both students and staff. In particular, the accessibility features really enabled his independence. He always felt worried about asking for support or not knowing how to go about that. And so by learning those features like dictation and hands up features and knowing where all the file content was, that really empowered him to be independent. And the biggest thing for him was one of the work experiences that he did in the summer. They were actually using Microsoft Teams in the business. So he already knew all the strategies and tools that could really easily be transferred over. And that made the process of him joining that work experience so much easier. And he's kind of seeking out now for other employers that are using that content because it's familiar to him. There's actually a picture on the right-hand side of one of his sessions. Before lockdown, I had to self-isolate. And I'm sure you all know that students on the spectrum would be really anxious about having a different teacher or having a sudden change because I wasn't alerted until the evening. before. So instead, to create a really consistent approach, we just got my support member staff to put me on the smart board, and the session actually ran exactly how it would have before, using their OneNotes and Teams. Sam, did you have a question for that?
Yeah, sorry. Somebody, and I didn't quite catch their name, has raised their hand to ask a question. And I don't know how to use that function of bringing them in to be able to ask a question. So I've just asked if you could put it in the chat so that we can have that question. Sorry, Charlotte, carry on. Hopefully the question will come through the chat or the question and answer.
And so the session basically ran exactly the same as how it would have before. The students could still interact with me. I could hear everyone in the classroom. And then when the students needed to ask a question or wanted more support, they could just message me on their phone via the Teams app. And it worked really well. And I think that was what really supported James' progress. Next slide, please.
I think we might have a question, and I might have worked out how to bring Rihanna into have you got a question that you wanted to ask? Carry on, Charlotte.
Okay. And then some other support strategies for learners with SEND. We were sort of discussing about implementing a variety of teaching strategies and kind of not being afraid to try different things. I've put some logos of some really good resources and websites that I use in my sessions, including Padlet and Mentimeter, but trying not to get it really stagnant. I think in the first lockdown, we were kind of relying on consistency and simple apps that students could pick up quite quickly. But even when we came out of lockdown and we were going back into sessions, we quickly realised that we needed to make sure that there was a real variety to keep students engaged. The biggest thing was being the role model for all students, making sure that we were doing those best practices on live calls. So making sure that we were in a good space, that we had our camera on, we had our microphones on, and also kind of creating those conversations. The biggest thing we used to do at the start, and we're still doing, is a check-in. So we just do a bit of a, what have you watched on telly last night? What have you been up to? Or maybe a themed question each morning, just to get those students feeling comfortable, like Sam mentioned at the start, and just checking in and making sure that they're happy and that they're ready to learn. And then just trying to provide that time and space to nurture creativity. So quite often we'll create little activities that students can do in a variety of ways. One thing that was really great at this just before Christmas is I work with students that are going on to employment outcomes, and we created a Christmas cracker. So all the students from home could create content and team building games and activities. And then we delivered all of that safely to care homes. And then the residents of the care home could do a virtual call with us to open the boxes and the different things that we'd made. And I think that really promoted kind of inclusion and within the community, and getting those students still doing those really important employment outcomes, and almost like work placements to keep the students really invested in their outcomes. Next slide, please. So a bit like what I was talking about earlier, here's just some examples of some engagement things that I've done. On the left is Mentimeter, and on the right is Padlet. Padlet races are particularly great because they create a bit of competition, and we know a lot of our students get on board with competition. So I would just create a shelf and write their names along the top, and then they could write answers. So that Padlet was about what skills and qualities would make a good friend, and it was whoever could post the most won. And then they could all go back and peer assess, so they could put thumbs up to the ones that they agreed with, thumbs down to the ones they didn't. And again, just really getting that engagement and social communication within the autism dual curriculum.
Charlotte, just to stop you for 2 minutes, Ryan has posted in the chat that Nearpod is a really good tool to use, which has lots of flexibilities and activities that you can deliver online. And I can see by your face that that's something that we haven't tried at our college, but other colleagues on the call this afternoon might have experience of that and be able to share some of that. And we have another question that's come in, is around kind of what strategies and activities do you use with learners? So when you're introducing new digital tools?
Yeah. So on the left, on the Mentimeter, that was a new introduction of a topic. So when we went after Christmas, we were starting a staying safe in the community topic, and I was aware that probably a lot of the students might not know what that would mean or what that could be about. So that's called a word cloud. All the students anonymously submit words. You can set how many you want, and then it all appears on a live cloud, and you can see all the words popping into it. And the thing that I really like with that is the more students say the same word, the bigger the word is. So as you can see, a lot of students said independence, so the word kept getting bigger. And I think that again provides confidence to students. If they're maybe not sure about it, they can see a couple of words appear first before they then input into that. And then what we've done is you can export that to an image, and we put that on our Teams page. So when we were doing sessions a couple of weeks down the line, we could either go back and recap it, or they could use that as a word bank to have those words when we're completing OneNote. So I definitely think Mentimeter and Padlet are a really good way of initial assessment, and you can archive those, so you've got those for future marking and things to recap. So I definitely recommend those two.
I think that if the other thing, Charlotte, might be around reducing the learner's anxiety to learn a different way of introducing those tools. So to give them the confidence. Is there any strategies that you use when you're bringing in something that you've never used before with learners that you may use so that they're not scared by it, and then that increases their anxiety, and they may not want to attend because there are things that they're not aware of and it's not what they're used to using?
Definitely. So what we do before all the sessions is we put a kind of how-to guide, and sometimes I'll record myself through Stream or through Teams using that tool. So with Mentimeter, I went on a couple of days before the session and recorded myself doing it and showing them all the fun things that they can do on it, so that they had time to watch it and kind of understand it. And then kind of go from there. So that's really helpful for our students. And I think sometimes it's good with, I've got quite a mix of students that are quite tech confident and less confident, so they would then support each other and again get that social communication and those key outcomes going. With breakout rooms, you can decide if you wanted to who was going in what room. So because I know the learners really well, I could then sort of choose who I would put with who to support them. Where there were students that were highly anxious, it's really important that we're supporting them with the support team. And also it might be that I record the content that we've captured on that day and they could look at it another time. And I think it's making that learning almost 24/7, that wider learning opportunity. And again, before we had all of the digital technology, if they didn't engage in the lesson would end and we'd try again next time. Whereas I think the difference now is I've had students that have maybe had other factors going on where they're really anxious and kind of shut down, but then they've sent me a message at like 7-8 o'clock in the evening say, oh, I'm really proud of myself, Charlotte, I had a go at it when I felt calmer tonight and I've really enjoyed it, and can you have a look at what I've done the next day? And then we could catch up and go through it again. So I think you're kind of creating even more learning opportunities than we ever had before. Which follows on nicely to this. It's just a slide giving you some ideas for OneNote, but OneNote has been a real success for us because again, you're completing really accessible worksheets that students can access at any time, even for students that had work physically sent home because they might not have had internet or they didn't want to access online content. We could then upload it to OneNote, so when they were ready they could log on and see all the work they'd already created, and they be really involved in their work. And there's some really interesting sort of discussions that I had with students when we did a worksheet in the classroom and then compared it to a OneNote, and they took so much more pride in the OneNote than they did with worksheets because you're reducing that anxiety of writing. Next slide, please. And again, just similar, collaboration with parents is really fundamental. We've tried to get parents on board, so we've been doing things like bake-offs and quizzes where we've also got the parents involved, and they could almost come on and be the judges or give some feedback, and also be able to see the students' OneNotes and just be more aware of the work that the students are doing. And I think that's so important. Next slide, please. And then here's some frequently asked questions that we've had come up a lot with parents or with other educators. and some good responses. I think in particular, something that we've been doing a lot that's had really good success is pre-recording sessions. So it might be that students are having to go to doctor's appointments, or they might be really unwell, or they might be too anxious, or even just that there's a technology difficulty. If parents are using the laptops during the day or the Wi-Fi is not good, we've been pre-recording content that students can access at any time. And our team's site is obviously open 24/7, so students can get worksheets and OneNotes and chat with their peers at any time. It just makes it really accessible. And we're really lucky at the college that we have the opportunity for college loans and wider support and bursaries to support those students getting equipment, like Sam said, so we're not having to bring them in unnecessarily, and using really accessible, differentiated resources that are having a real impact with students.
Thank you, Charlotte. I just, before I go on to the next slide, which is the top point on there, is about the additional investment that the college has made. And I just wanted to give you a minute or two just to outline really what your role is as a digital coach, because that investment from the college has really been so welcomed by all staff across the organisation, and given us that focus of a full inset day last week, where came right at the right time, didn't it, with the EdTech focus and the Microsoft Teams. So I just thought it'd be useful for everyone to hear about your role and why it's so crucial.
Yeah, so I think in previous years, like I'm sure a lot of other colleges have, we've got a learning tech team that can always give us support on content, but they've not been teachers. They might not have an awareness of what it's really like delivering in a classroom. And I think for a lot of years, we've had kind of different people in the college that have maybe been interested in tech and apps and programs. And the college really felt beneficial to develop a digital coach role where it is the best of both. So it's staff that have got a real interest in technology, but also have that teacher coach aspect. So like Sam said, we on Friday delivered inset training to the whole college, really about those key focuses that we know that teachers are finding difficult, such as blended delivery, hybrid delivery. It could just be using assessment and feedback online, and really going to those staff and supporting them. There's also a brilliant program that you can use that's free called the JISC Discovery Tool to really reflect on your own practice. And we worked with staff individually to fill those in and then provide the support that would just excel the skills they've already got. So yeah, it's been a real privilege working as a digital coach and within the team.
Thank you, Charlotte. And I think that from our college perspective, we're very lucky that our leadership here at the college isn't about a one-size-fits-all approach and takes every member of staff's individual needs into account, and really focuses that training on what each member of staff needs as we go through. I think I've spoken about the IT solutions, and Charlotte has as well about providing that resource for learners. I have added here something that came out through Ofsted yesterday. When I mentioned the word Ofsted, everyone's switching off and, oh, I don't want to know about Ofsted, but actually it's quite a useful tool in a review that's been done around remote education. So I've got that in there so that you might want to have a look at that if you're looking at remote learning and wanting further strategies and what Ofsted view that to be like. And I think that just brings me on now to the additional speakers that we've got here, Will and Ben, this afternoon, is that we really needed to focus on an additional platform for learners with severe learning difficulties. And the first question that I know all of you are going to ask, so I've preempted it and I'll say it now, is that how did you finance? Where did you get the money from to invest in when the colleges are, the financial situation for all colleges is really tight, as we all know. But we used our catch-up fund, that tuition fund that we were given, that enabled us to purchase this technology for learners with severe learning difficulties. Apologies, I have made a mistake there, and it does say PMLD, and I should have removed that, but we are using it for those learners with severe learning difficulties. So if I can hand over to Will, and he'll take you through autonomy and show you what we've just invested in at the college. Thank you, Will.
No worries, thank you. Very nice to meet everyone. Yeah, so I'll kind of briefly explain kind of what autonomy is and how we're working with Weston College. So really kind of autonomy is really about supporting vulnerable people in education and social care settings. If you go to the next slide. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, cool. So we generally work across most of the places we work with are kind of through central government and local government and the social care providers. And we basically work in supporting vulnerable people. Primarily, most of our service users have some kind of learning disability or mental health need, and they are getting some kind of commission support package through the local government. That might be really light touch, or it might be a 24/7 care package. But we're kind of very much, we exist to basically really support vulnerable people with kind of really good technology. But our ethos is based around kind of embedding a never-ending perpetual learning cycle into social care. So it's really trying to move away from that attitude of kind of caring for someone and doing things on people's behalf, and moving towards an attitude of kind of facilitating someone's independence and measuring their success and looking back on how far that they've come and celebrating that success with them, but also helping them get to the next stage as well. Next slide, please. So to try and illustrate that, what we've tried to do is create this kind of pathway essentially. And the idea of this pathway is basically, so you are able to step outside your contribution to the pathway and see how this service user is progressing through life, if that makes sense. So I'm sure most people, if not everyone here in the conversation, is probably at the start of this kind of pathway. So generally, people are in education, their parents are quite often around, the tutors and anyone in the educational system is around, and they're wanting to learn the skills that you kind of learn in education. But it's very likely that they'll probably, then they go through transitions, they'll kind of transition out of education and they'll go into, maybe that be kind of day centers or supported living, and then they might want to get a job. And the idea is that the support that someone needs at 15 years old to become more independent is going to be wildly different from the support someone needs at 25 years old or 35 years old. So for example, a lot of the people that we support, they're in supported living. Their parents aren't really in the picture. If they are, it's kind of quite light touch. But the things that they want to do is really develop their independent living skills. They're already getting some kind of commission support. Whereas maybe at the other end, you might find people, something about the parents are obviously way heavily more engaged. There's a lot more engagement from education, but at the weekends, maybe there's the drive to just be able to like help them kind of make their own sandwiches or some of their meals. So their parents don't have to always be around to help them with that. So it really depends on what their needs are and how they're traveling through that kind of system. The next bit will come up at the bottom, hopefully. Brilliant. Okay, cool. So what we do as a company is we essentially build up relationships with everyone in this pathway. So again, if someone's kind of at the start of this pathway, for us, we're building up relationships primarily with the education provider, might be the local government, definitely parent carers at this point. And then they start transitioning out of education. And then you've got social workers that might be involved. We'll build up relationships with them. And our duty is essentially to support this service user or educational student across the whole of this pathway until ideally they don't need us anymore. The point is we want to kind of make ourselves redundant, if that makes sense. We do acknowledge that that may never be the case because we're generally focusing on people that really have quite severe, moderate and severe learning disabilities, and they may need social services for the whole of their lives, but our duty is to make them as independently as possible within their needs, if that makes sense. And then as they progress through this pathway, we're collecting this kind of really rich data on how they're developing towards their independence. And what we can see through this data is their abilities, their needs, their aspirations, how quickly they learn something new. And then based on that data, we can start making better judgments on how they're going to move forward. So if we know student X takes 3 months to learn a new task, if they're going to go into employment, then we know and say, for argument's sake, they've got 10 new tasks to learn. We can make a rough estimation on how long they're going to take to kind of settle into that workplace. So we can liaise with everyone around to say, well, we think it's going to take X amount of time for this person to settle in. So I put in X amount of support and then review that at this point. So the kind of big picture is the more information we've got on them, the better we are to make decisions around their needs and be much more reactive to their care needs. And the idea is that because it's kind of technology, it can be quite scalable. So we can do this kind of to a lot of people at the same time. Next slide, please. Yeah, so how do we do it? I guess is probably the main question. So what we essentially have is we have an app, and through the app, we create content for service users specifically that have additional needs to guide them through tasks. So you'll see on the front of this app, vacuum. So that will be kind of an instructional step-by-step video showing them how to vacuum their house. And then after they watch each of the videos, and they can watch them with their support workers, with their parents, they self-assess their care needs. So at that point, they're self-assessing, how much support do I need with vacuuming my home? And what we do as a team, we'll basically work alongside maybe a tutor or a social care provider to understand where they are in their independence journey. Essentially, we're doing an initial assessment on them, trying to find, right, you're here on day one, and then we'll set them some goals, and we will work with the educational provider or the social care provider or the local authority. So we communicate the goals with them, but then we can start measuring them. So say, for example, the sat with a student, they really want to be able to vacuum their room by themselves. The vacuum would be set as their target on our system. They'd be watching that maybe with their parents or maybe with their tutor, trying to learn that task. And we can see through their self-evaluation that over time, the staff is able to step back, and you can see that they're becoming more independent. And the idea is over time, they can learn that task, and we can see the history of them progressing against that. And then on the back end of that, behind the scenes, we have this kind of data dashboard. And on the data dashboard, we can see individuals, how they're progressing. I mean, and that's all broken down over the Care Act, and it's basically broken down into really deep sections. So we can literally say, well, Joe, who is in supported living, he wants to be more independent. To Joe, that means that he can't cook at the moment and he wants to learn to cook. Over the last 6 months, he's been focusing on these cooking tasks, and he's made progress in 3 of them. And we expect that he'll make progress in the next 6 months with these tasks, if that makes sense. And then once he's learned them, we then sit with Joe and go, what's next? So it's that perpetual learning journey. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, so we basically, we work up and down the country. A lot of our work is through local governments, and most of our work as well is in adult social care. And one of the things that we've picked up on is we are getting into people's care packages, 25, 35 years old. And one of the things that we feel quite strongly is that if we had gotten into their care package earlier, they could have been more independent by the time they got to 35. So one of the drivers for us is trying to work with children's services and colleges to really try and work together to kind of get in the package earlier. And hopefully they won't need us at 35 because we can step out at 25, if that makes sense. So we work with a number of local authorities and educational providers, and we're currently doing a project with NHS Digital and the Local Government Association to help people with learning disabilities into work. Yeah, so in regards of kind of the wider context in the benefits for an SEN provider, I guess. So one of the things is we're focused on is obtaining the feedback directly from the service user, so from that student. So historically, it's always been very challenging to get feedback, honest feedback from students, and that's due to a number of complex things. So it might be that they're nervous at that period because you're generally asking them how they feel. They might be influenced by the staff, there's echolalia and stuff like that. So by grabbing their feedback, their self-assessment through the app without anyone else being around, it may be incorrect, it may be correct, but it's able to add that data point to the conversation. So we can say, this person feels like this. And it's very hard to argue as much with data. And we've been in situations where we've had reviews with parent carers and service users where the parent carer would often speak on behalf of their son or daughter. And they would say, well, they can't do that. And we would be able to say, well, in the last 6 months, not only have they been doing that, they've been doing it completely independently. And actually, it changes the psyche to think, oh, actually, maybe if they could do that, they could do this as well. So it's kind of, again, it's moving away from that caring for someone and worrying about kind of cotton wooling them into being safely facilitating their independence within the realms of their abilities, if that makes sense. So yeah, and through the data set, one of the things we can do, we definitely do in adult social care, is we work with the social care providers to help them evidence the care they're delivering. And it's the same premise in the education space. So part of the project at Weston College is understanding, this is all this data we've collected. How can this feed into your EHCP process? How can this feed into the way that you evidence budget spend and stuff like that to central and local governments and grants and anything else? And also to parent carers as well, what have they been doing and stuff like that. And the idea is, again, finally, it's a personalized pathway. It's not like an app and here you go. And we definitely don't see ourselves as a technology company. We very much see ourselves as a support provider, and it's our job to support them with their independence. And as part of that, our job is to create innovative content that supports their needs that we can deliver through the device, and then also support them to the next stage. So it's very much trying to be a very different approach to how we support kind of vulnerable people as they progress through life, and kind of setting realistic goals and aspirations, and just seeing how they're going to progress down their journey, because they're all different. And we know that they're all different. And the point of creating good technology is it to be adaptable to their needs. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is one of our service users. Hopefully this works.
I found autonomy really useful because it helps me doing step-by-step instructions. Like every Sunday we sit down and I choose 2 autonomies a week, or more than 2 a week, and then I follow it from my autonomy app on my phone.
Yeah, I found it really good. I mean, I've seen a girl I support really improve her skills massively from using it, not just in the kitchen but in house jobs and in her confidence in doing things independently. Well, basically it's for making sure the house is secured at night, and how to cook spaghetti bolognese, pasta bake, chili con carne, and evening routine. Especially in the house where I support the young lady that uses it, we strive to make the girls as independent as possible, and she is very capable in the kitchen, and it's really developed her skills. And our involvement, we've taken a massive step back since using autonomy, and we're always around if she needs us. But yeah, she very rarely comes and asks us on certain things, especially after we have practiced recipes and routines a few times. I found it really helpful with little men on the side. It helps me think what I've done, and then I think, well, I have done a bit of support, no support or more support, but I found it really good to ask. I tell the staff what I think, and then they tell what they think, sort of thing. I also think it's rubbed off on the girls that she lives with, because her interest in striving to be independent has rubbed off on them, and they're trying to do what they can in the kitchen and with the routines as well. Actually, one of the things that's been really good is the evening routine. So remembering turn lights off, lock doors, just doing that is a real improvement for them and their independence. It helps me a great lot of help. I found autonomy.
Cool. No, that's it, I think.
Thank you, Will. We're just going to hand over to Ben now, who's been working on this project with autonomy, and to go through and talk about why we set it up and the impact it's having in the college. So over to you, Ben.
Yeah, I suppose just to kind of summarise it from an educational provider's point of view, and as to why we're really excited about working together with autonomy. I think many of the things that Charlotte touched upon in terms of the use of Teams, Microsoft Teams, and other apps are directly applicable to autonomy and working with and supporting students with more sort of complex needs. And this is why I think autonomy really comes into its own, and why we've kind of really sought to invest in it, because one of the things that's most frustrating for anyone who's supporting or teaching learners with complex needs is quite often that the lack of opportunity to learn in and across contexts. Quite often, I know, for example, historically, I've seen people teaching kind of ironing within a classroom with an ironing board. And whilst that might be useful in terms of demonstrating someone being able to potentially learn how to iron within a classroom, it's no good in terms of whether that young person can transfer that skill into the context of their own home, or even into the context of a supported living environment if they transition and move into there. So one of the real key kind of elements for strengths from our point of view is the fact that autonomy can work across all contexts, and that it follows the young person wherever they are. In addition to that, it's available 24/7. So it's available at the times at which you would expect anyone, in terms of the ebb and flow of their life, to need that support. You know, the example in the video in terms of the evening routines, I think that was really, really useful, and really really illustrative of kind of the importance of that being able to apply within those different contexts. The other thing that we're really finding, and this kind of echoes some of the stuff that Charlotte also touched on, in terms of engaging the circles of support around those children and young people with more complex needs. So it can be, autonomy can support a young person across contexts. It can engage their tutors in college, their support workers in college. It can also engage parent carers. It can also engage support workers and social care providers, whether they receive floating support or whether they receive support in the community or within a supported living environment. And obviously one of the things that we're really trying to do is ensure that there's consistency of learning across all of those contexts. And one of the real kind of potential benefits that we see with autonomy is that that can be the vehicle that enables that, and the glue that kind of brings all of those people together. The other key thing, which I'm sure colleagues will potentially find frustrating, is when you've worked with a young person potentially for 3, 4, sometimes even 5 years, and you see them developing lots of great skills in the college environment, but then they leave college and potentially they, you know, maybe don't have a great social care package, they're still at home, and actually what happens is they actually regress in terms of the skills that they have developed, and that's really disheartening when you've kind of spent all that time and you've seen all that progress that young person's made. And obviously the kind of explanation that Will gave in terms of autonomy follows that young person, both in terms of context, but also over their life and their learning pathway. And I think that that's really important in terms of that future, enabling that future progress and learning and that transition. You know, whilst you think of some of the young people with complex needs maybe coming to college 4 or 5 days a week, but generally it's only for a maximum of 3, 4 or 5 years. So in terms of a lifespan, it's a really short period of a young person's life. And obviously what we want to do is make sure that those young people are best prepared for their adult lives. And where that's someone, you know, with a complex learning barrier, no learning disabilities, there should be something that they can take with them to ensure that they kind of have that transition to a meaningful adult life. And there's a real kind of opportunity, I think, within this to support that. So kind of how have we gone about embedding autonomy into the Weston College offer? So the process has been kind of very much one around raising awareness and training. So in the first instance, it's about training staff in terms of what autonomy is, how it works, how it can be relevant to the learners that we support. Similarly, also raising awareness and training with parent carers and also other circles of support that are engaged with our young people who attend our programs. And it's about embedding autonomy into the curriculum planning and the curriculum delivery. So it's not an add-on, it's not something that's kind of separate to, it's something that's built into the delivery of our life skills pathway. It's something that's built into our tutorial process and our one-to-one process. And I think this is one of the key things about autonomy is not a product, is a service, and the local education officer that is provided by autonomy is key in terms of that, because they liaise with our personal tutors. So our personal tutors are, I suppose the best way of describing them, are a key worker for our students, our young people with complex needs. And our personal tutors know those young people inside and out and have responsibility for planning their programs of learning and programs of study, and also for facilitating their transition, facilitating the annual reviews of their education, health and care plans, and all of those sorts of things, and individualizing their programs. So our personal tutors kind of work with the local education officer provided by autonomy, who knows autonomy inside and out, so that we can match the two things together. So personal tutor will then kind of work with the young person and their circle of support to look at a program through autonomy that can support them in terms of their program of learning, but also their aspirations and their future transitions, so that we can really kind of pull all that information together with the young person at the centre. And the other thing that's really kind of beneficial in terms of the platform and the information that's provided by autonomy is that it gives monthly update in terms of usage and progress. And that's a great tool as a personal tutor to be able to sit down and sit with that young person and say, oh, great, I can see you've been using this at home, but you've also used it at lunchtime at college. So you're making your own lunch here, or you're taking responsibility for securing the house at home, which is something you wanted to work on with the support of your parents. So in terms of the kind of, and I think the other thing is that the video content is tailored to the individual, and it kind of really speaks to all the things that we know that works with in terms of best practice for learning with and for young people with complex needs, in that the content is scaffolded. There's opportunities for overlearning built in throughout through the access of the videos, and also there's that kind of opportunity that once a kind of skill is perhaps achieved, quite often there's that opportunity to kind of come back to it and spiral back and overlearn a period of time. All things that we know are really important in terms of sustaining and learning new skills for students with complex needs. So I just think in terms of the platform, there's a real possibilities in terms of meeting what we hope to achieve through our delivery and through what we provide for our learners with more complex needs within our setting.
Thank you, Ben, for giving that overview. And I think that just looking through the questions that have just been asked, one of those questions is around, as I mentioned earlier, is around the funding and how we secured the funding for the college. And like I said, it's about, in this year, it was using the catch-up funding and the tuition fund, because our learners had such a long period out of education from March when we went into lockdown. But it's about how we sustain that for the future. And I think that, as Ben mentions, it's so important to be working with the local authority, and if it's part of the learners learning programme, then as they move on, that will be that seamless, that programme and built in. Will, I don't know whether we can put you on the spot, but somebody's asked me about the cost of it for individual learner, so I can see that you've just put in there that it's £26 per.
Yeah, so we basically charge £26 per person per week, and people pay monthly or annually is quite common. And that includes everything. So it's basically, it's just like a set fee. So that includes all of the new content that we produce for that service user and any other service user that comes through the app. And then it also includes all of the training for all the staff, and that's continual. So it's kind of, we definitely acknowledge that staff turnaround is quite high, especially in adult social care. So to ensure that everyone in that kind of key circle is kind of trained, confident, that's going to be consistent throughout the year. So we train on average around about 3.3.5 people per service user per annum. So you get the idea that it's kind of consistent, but that is required to ensure that for that service user, everyone around them knows what autonomy is, how to use it, and they're kind of continually embedding it in their care delivery. And it's probably worth mentioning something that kind of come up is people go through kind of spits and spats, and the autonomy data kind of represents that. So there's points when, and Charlotte definitely touched on it in her presentation, that when people are really engaged and then they're also like less engaged, if that makes sense. And the autonomy data kind of represents that. So when someone transitions, say for example, they've built up quite a lot of skills at college, say, ironing, like Ben said, and then they transition that skill to home, you would expect them to then go to need more support at home while they're helping them kind of transition that task. But then once they kind of do that and over time they learn it, they're able to kind of step back again. So the data it's not there to judge, it's just meant to kind of represent someone's journey, and maybe in this situation they're having a bit more difficulty, but the point is, if we measure it, we can be really quick at acting on it, I think is the main point.
Thanks, Will. And I can see that we've had another comment saying that there's a free version to vulnerable people in response to COVID.
Yeah, so that is correct. So we offered out a free version of the app throughout COVID. That doesn't come with any of the relationship building. It's literally just access to the app. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
But is that something that's still available, Will? Yeah,
so it's still available, and it will basically probably stop towards or very much near the end of, I mean, when we put it as available, how they had those kind of like Nando's piri piri kind of five hot, heat levels of government lockdown. We basically made the assumption that when we got to it was number 4 or 5 when we went into lockdown, we said, well, when it gets back to 1 or 2, we'll then stop. They've lost that, but the premise is probably once it's either very low level or not around or thing anymore, that it will stop. So yeah, so at the moment, yeah, definitely you can just sign up for that for our website.
I think that my advice to any colleagues in colleges at the moment would be to maybe see if you could use the free version whilst we're in this pandemic situation, and then gathering the data and the information that you can use to then go back to your senior leadership team around why it's so important that you invest in further technology for those students.
Yeah, it's probably worth mentioning from a data perspective, we can't share any of the data that's collected through the free version. Under GDPR,
so could look at the journeys and the improvement, of those things to sell back to their senior leadership team, because I know that in any decisions in a college, it's always about the impact. So I suppose it's just you've got that free service a little bit at the moment, so that it could kind of try before you buy, I suppose.
Yeah. No, that's fine. Yeah.
I'm just conscious of the time, and I know that we've carried on. Some of you may need to leave, but if anybody wants to, the ETF have always asked us to make sure that we give people a break after talking at you for quite a long period of time. So please do that if needed. But we just really now just carry on, sending us any questions that you might have around the remote delivery that we've shared with you this afternoon. Will has included his contact details there. So if anybody wants to find out specific information about the learners that they're working with or their organisations, then Will is keen to hear from you. And so please email Will directly. And obviously, if you've got any other information that you'd like from us as our SEND Centre for Excellence, then our email's there. We've just put a couple of other slides together this afternoon, just because we know how much information people are seeking at the moment. So we've just included there some COVID easy read resources that may be useful for you to work through with your learners in really understanding what's happening in the world around them. And just to say that on the ETF website, obviously all of us and you out there are worried about your staff and your students' well-being. So there's a really big section on the ETF website that you can also access. And the ETF has a partner with Education Support, who at the moment are providing free support and counsellors to educators. So we thought that was really useful for you to have those details, so that your staff can access that additional support if needed. And there's those details for you. So thank you for joining us this afternoon. Just on a final note, before I forget, thank you, Caroline. is that with all of this, we would just love to hear your feedback. If anybody's got 15 minutes free, I know that's a big ask at the moment, but if you do want to give us feedback and obviously honest feedback, then we'd really appreciate it if you could complete our evaluation, and it can be found there on that link. So when the slides come out to you, Caroline always sends a copy of everybody that attended the slides, so you've got them, but we'd really appreciate your feedback. And if you're obviously not watching this live, then it's still okay for you to do the evaluation. The more evaluations we get in, the more we can go back to ETF and say about how the sector really needs to, and the Department for Education needs to continue to invest in the Centres for Excellence, so we can continue to share practice and learn from each other. So for those of you that need to leave, then nice to see you all or hear from you. And I know that there's some questions that have been put in the chat, so I'll just go back to that. Yes, I think, Thomas, I've probably hopefully answered your question there, that these will be available afterwards. Thank you for your feedback, Nicola. And I'm just seeing if there's any other questions that have come through rather than nice comments for us to end a busy day on. So there's no more questions coming, but feel free. We're all here for another half an hour. So we can answer your questions if you have anything specific to your college or more general comments. I think that probably you've done yes, most of you are starting to log off now. Oh, I think somebody's saying, I hope to say, okay, so Chrissy, if you want to stay on, we can talk to you and answer any of your questions, no problem. I don't know if I can try and unmute you, Chrissy, so that you can actually use your voice rather than typing. See if I can find you.
There's a good question that's come across, that they've got a student that's got hearing impairments, and if they come across any software to help with this on Teams, there's a really good button you can press now that turns on live captioning. I don't know if you've tried that. Is when you're in a call, you press the 3 dots and then turn on live captioning, and only the student can see that themselves. There's some really good how-tos on the Microsoft website. When I did another webinar, there was also an app called Microsoft Translate, and that can link up to the Teams call. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Charlotte.
I think there's another one possibly for Will about, is it possible to have different skills added, for example, office-based skills? I'm assuming that relates to autonomy.
Yeah. So I guess in a nutshell, the answer is yes. So basically, one of our jobs is to always consistently produce new content. So if we've got quite a lot of content on the app, if we don't have it, our aim is to kind of go and make it. So if someone says, great cooking, blah, 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 but I really want, couscous and sausage, and you don't have it, can you go and make it? Then we would go and make that. At the moment, most of the content is focused around developing independent living skills in the home. And we're working on this project at the moment behind the scenes in regards to employment. So if it is employment skills, it would come in a different part, but I guess the short answer is yes.
And Chrissy, I'm hopefully you're able to you've been unmuted, if that's the word. So I don't know if you're there, that you can ask your questions.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Hi, nice to hear you.
And you too. No, it was just that if you were going to go on with more of the presentation, I thought, well, I can hang on for a bit longer.
Oh.
As I've seen, nearly everybody's gone, but thank you. Great. It's useful. Everybody, well, I personally always take something away positive from everything.
Oh, well, thank you for the feedback, Chrissy. And if you've got time to do an evaluation, then we'd really appreciate it. But it's just that sometimes people just want to have conversations about their own college, and we're always happy to, we always book an hour and a half out, because we never know how good we'll be on keeping to time. But actually, we've done quite well today. We've managed to fit it in just over an hour. So thank you, Chrissy, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
Okay, bye.